Welcome to the Framework Podcast on the Fire Nuggets platform with Jay Bonnifield and me, Nick Papa. Our intent here is tapping into expertise to capture tangible fireground takeaways. By having pointed conversations with experienced folks, we aim to extract tacit knowledge and intuitive judgments. Through this, we hope to leave the listeners with a better understanding of the fireground and actionable insights to apply to their next fire. For our inaugural episode, we have Chief Brian Bastinelli. Brian is a 29-year veteran of the Harrisburg, Pennsylvania Fire Department, where he is a battalion chief of dog platoon. Brian is also the curator of Firemanship, a journal for firemen, and a professional photographer. Brian is a consummate student of the fire service and believes in the use of dash and helmet cams to capture fireground footage for analysis and improvement. Brian openly shares his game film on his YouTube channel for others to benefit from. Today, we are going to dissect some of those videos to extract the tacit knowledge and intuitive judgments from those incidents to add slides to your slide trays and absorb that experience vicariously. The focus of the conversation today will be on fires involving void spaces. Being an old city, Harrisburg is full of pre-World War II era and turn-of-the-century building construction where void spaces are plentiful. Brian is going to discuss size-up cues and patterns and tactical considerations to identify void space fires and how to get ahead of these challenging fires. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. You didn't tell me it was going to be the inaugural edition, so there's a little pressure added in the moment. Uh, I'm happy to be here. I'm glad that you thought of me. This is something I love talking about, and it's pretty much what the types of fires that we go to. So I think it should be a good discussion.
Excellent. So why don't we kind of kick things off by, I know you have some slides here to discuss, building construction as it relates to these void spaces being formed, and then how we can use that building understanding of building construction and tie that into size up, so how we can identify the presence of these void spaces and readily identify when the fire has involved them.
Sure. So I think that whether we always agree or want to realize that the void spaces pretty much control our fires, it is the foundation of fire growth. I think outside of air and fuel and heat in these types of buildings. And I do want to say, like, I'm specifically talking about legacy style wood frame and ordinary constructed buildings. These things that we're going to talk about do apply to other types of building constructions. This is what I have most of my training in, where we go to fires. This is what we do. So I don't like talking about things that I don't do as much. But I think when we look at these types of buildings, understanding the void spaces, understanding how they spread fire, and then how to adjust your tactics and get your people in the right places is critical to that. So void spaces to me is anything that is in the building that is hidden, they're unimpeded, and they're interconnected. So I think that when we look at this picture, we can see things that we'll talk about all the way up at the top. We have the caulk loft. Above the steps, there's a large void space. On the rear section of the house, there is another caulk loft. And then there's all these interconnections with the floors and the ceilings. And out front, you have porch roofs and cornices and all that kind of stuff. So we have to understand all of that. There's two other areas that I kind of put in the same category as void spaces, though they are not void spaces. I don't think we can talk about void spaces and fire spread without talking about them. One of them is the open interior stairway, and that is probably one of the biggest voids in the house, but we don't ever really look at it in that way. And then the other is the exterior coating of the house, because that drives a lot of energy in some of these fires. So we can take a look at that. I think the interior stairway is the inside of the house is a void as well. We just never treat it that way. But we have to control it and manipulate it in the same ways. And the interior stair is an interior chimney, so it creates a huge avenue for fire, heat, smoke, gases to spread. And then, like I said, the outside of the house, a lot of our houses are wood frames, are wood clapboard siding, and then they have what we call insul brick over the top of that, which is a basically an asphalt shingle made to look like bricks. And then in more modern times, we've put vinyl siding over top of it, which is really the same thing as the insul brick, just in a different form. And that creates a massive amount of heat energy on the outside of the building. And I think that sometimes we forget how important it is to control that. If we don't control that, it's going to continue to drive the fires that are developing in all those other spaces. I just have a quick video of insul brick fire. So this is a second floor and third and a half story fire that has been initially knocked down. And then on the front porch, you'll see, can you see my cursor over there? Moving around. Okay.
Yep.
So you'll see two little pools of fire on the front porch and then one over here in the alleyway. So when the insul brick and the vinyl siding heat up, they melt and they turn to liquid and they drop these little flaming balls of tar, which creates a liquid fuel fire on the flat surface that it finds. And then that begins to burn and then it redirects that energy back up the house and starts the whole process over again. So take a look at that happening here at a fire. And you can see like that ends up being a tremendous amount of heat energy that's developed and is being put back into the fire building.
Mhm.
And it develops rapidly. It's also easily controllable. You'd be surprised how easy it is to knock it down with 1.75 inches. I think a lot of people get nervous when they see this volume of fire, but it's really surface fire. This particular house, they tore all that insul brick off, and the wood clapboard siding wasn't even burnt, which is crazy when you see the amount of fire that was there. So that I just think that's super important. And if you want, I'll just kind of go down through some of these other small void spaces that we have to deal with before we get into the big ticket things. Sound good? So balloon framing, a lot of the country has to deal with balloon framing. So most of ours is 2 stories. And if you look at the picture on the left, you see 2 stories of balloon frame and then a platform frame for the 3rd floor on top of it. And the problem there is it's interconnected with all of the joist spaces from each of the floors. So it allows fire to travel around the outside of this building. This video is just some water flowing down. You see it in the window, they're flowing the water and it's going in and you can see how it's traveling down that balloon framing in the front of the building. So obviously if we can travel water through that area, fire's going to spread ridiculously fast through there. And it has everything it needs. It's old, it's dried out, it has fuel, and it's working with a low intake, high output, which is a well-functioning chimney. So it preheats it as it goes and spreads that fire pretty quickly.
Yeah, Brian, for anybody
Yeah.
that's not super familiar with balloon frame, I know we've got a tremendous amount of them. That's the predominant wood frame building construction because
Yeah.
my city is in the same boat as yours, where it's mostly pre-World War II era, turn of the century. So we've got a lot of 3-deckers, which ours are actually 3.5-story wood balloon frame. So the balloon frame, the floor joists are essentially hung on a what's called a ribbon board, which is like a ledger board if you're familiar with deck construction, if you want to make the analogy. So that leaves those studs, which run the full height of the wall, completely open from top to bottom.
Yep. You can see here's on the right-hand side, here's that ribbon board, and then the joists are set on top of it, and it leaves that wide open. Now this particular building is only 2 stories of balloon frame, and then they platformed a 3rd story on top of it. Are your triple deckers a solid balloon frame the whole way up, like
Yes.
one stud?
They're true balloon frames. So most of them are 3.5 stories. So they'll from basement foundation all the way up to the half story will be continuous stud channel all the way up.
That's cool. Back when you could get tall trees.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, um, in our, in a lot of our buildings, how do we determine where voids are? I think is understanding that building construction is critical. And there's a ton of little places, a lot of people have said, seek out the triangles and you'll find voids. And I think that is very appropriate. If you look in the picture here, I just outlined some of the areas where there's void spaces. You have the cornice at the front of the top of the building, the cock loft on the top, that void space above the steps, which we'll talk more about. Same thing in the rear L area. And then you have your porch, maybe a bay window in the front, and then all of your stud bays and all of your joist spaces are all typical places where we have that. And then inside, if you look at the lower right-hand picture, there's the closet void space above the closets. A lot of our closets back to back. So there's one facing each direction into the adjoining bedrooms. And then there's this huge void space over top of them. That can be problematic. And then as we look further into those spaces, we hope that there's firewalls, but just like everything else, there's firewalls that are built on Mondays and firewalls that are built on Fridays. And so they may not be doing the job that they're intended to or that you think they're going to do. And then even the ones that have been built well are still 150 years old and they're starting to degrade or have been manipulated in some way. And that can be a big problem. Sometimes the firewall is the whole wall. This is a fire we had where there was some brick noggin in between the stud bays. And that's basically done for fire stopping, soundproofing, insulation purposes. It's not typical everywhere, but you can see it. Sometimes they just do it at the ends of the joist bays to keep the fire from getting out into that open bay. Sometimes, like here, it's the whole wall. We did some rough calculations, and each stud bay is a minimum of like 480 pounds. So if you think about the amount of weight that is being carried in this wall, it's pretty significant. We don't have a ton that are built like this, but that was just something interesting I thought we came up with. So back on the outside of the house, porches are a great fire spreader. If you think about how fire develops, it's going to want to go out and up, and it's going to go up until it hits something. It's going to spread out laterally. It's preheating that as it goes. So you get that rapid fire development along the front of the buildings. And some of those porches are just on like a header board, or some of them are built into that joist space. So you could have, not only could you fail the windows and get fire spread back into the houses, you could be getting some structural involvement in that between the first and second floors where it's actually connected to the building. So that can be a big problem. This is recently we had a little fire on in the Uptown, and we had pretty good porch fire spread. You can just see how efficiently it moves along there. Sorry, I'm looking all over the place.
Right. You brought up a great point too about the gasoline siding and the porch fires. I found was we do a lot about porch fire work. They're largely superficial fires. They look spectacular, but you can make quick work of them with a well placed and well manipulated stream.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always, so I like to have guys go through their stream selection from the biggest weapon down instead of the smallest weapon up. So, is it a deck gun fire? We did use the deck gun on this fire. It was pretty effective. If you look, we also have some other stuff going on. There's a car involved. There's a couple houses. But the porch fire, really, that can get knocked down by an 1.75-inch hand line in no time. And we do a blitz attack for our first in engine where as they come in, they'll drop a line and Somebody will they'll drop the line, leave somebody at the hydrant. The second guy will get up on the deck gun. They'll dump the tank and then make the hydrant connection. And our drivers have to pass that test to get that done without running out of water. And so that's a really good way for us to do that. That guy that we left at the hydrant comes up here though, he charges the hydrant and then comes up. He can start pulling the line. We got one guy operating the deck gun on the main body of fire, and he can come and get that line ready to stretch interior or knock down those porch fires and get that. And that works really well for us with a 3-man engine company. It's important to gain that ground quickly because we don't have that many people. In this,
Brian,
yeah,
just curious, what was there something on this one? You said you like working from top down as far as your weapon selection goes. Something on this one that tipped it over into deck gun versus 2.5. Is that a more of a staffing call? Is that like what is the deal breaker there? Like where you would choose one versus the other?
yeah. So this fire, I had the benefit of being able to see the back of the building as I approached the scene, and there was a ton of fire out there as well. So I knew we had a really well involved fire in at least one house. Um, and our truck company was delayed from this district was delayed due to another fire. So they were responding from that. So we had some players that were out of position. We were just a little bit behind the 8 ball on arrival here. So they had pulled the 1 3/4 line. It started, starting to develop pretty rapidly, and then they switched back to the deck gun operation. We got that initial outside fire knocked down, and then we did an interior push on all of the buildings that had fire. There's 3 of them that had a decent amount of fire in them, and we made interior attacks on those. On the one house to the Bravo side, which I didn't know at this point, was completely gutted in that there was no interior floors at all. It had collapsed and they cleaned it out, but they hadn't done the repairs on the house, or maybe never will. So that actually ended up being pretty good. That was a pretty good natural fire break for us on that side. But yeah, we'll just look at it. And, I hate to tell people, it depends, but there's sometimes when you just know it when you see it, and you get there and you're like, okay, this is a big one. There's a lot of energy here. This fire could benefit from a lot of water right now. And, can you still do it with an 1 3/4 line? Yeah, and I think a lot of people want to do it with an 1 3/4 line. But it's not our fire. That's what can I do? What can we do to stop this fire in its tracks as soon as possible to prevent people from losing their stuff is the goal. And I think sometimes the fire service, though that's always the goal, there's a lot of guys in the fire service who also like to go into that battle. And I don't blame them, but I think that sometimes skews our decision making. And like, okay, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to be involved with fighting this fire for a long time. Yeah, that's cool, but we need to get it out like right now.
Yeah, I like that top down, not bottom up.
Yeah,
I've never heard that before, but I like that way of looking at it.
yeah, and that's I think that's how most people do it, and that's how they've been trained. It's not necessarily through any fault of their own. They're just that's how he's been trained. We train on stretching the 1 3/4. We stretch it all the time, and for the most part, it does. Um, we get that error creep. I don't know if you want to call it that, or like, yeah, it worked today, so it's going to work next time. It's going to work next time, and now we're pulling it on 6 houses on fire, and maybe we shouldn't have. And believe me, I'm not like this fire. I can look at this and say, yeah, this is an offensive interior attack. I have no problem with that. We're just going to soften the target up a little bit. And when you look at how the military does their work, they're not going to just march a bunch of people into somewhere. They're going to bomb the crap out of it first, and then they're going to follow it up with their hand lines. And that's what we need to do. And it works pretty well, I think. So, but there's going to be people out there who will be like, "Oh, I got that all day, brother," and I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. So, Um, when we start looking closer inside of the house, we look at some other stuff that is less exciting and maybe we don't think about as much. So this is a window. We're looking at a window, and right here in the middle is the window weight. Um, if you're a dork, it's called a make weight. And it's the weight for the double hung window, but it creates a void space along the side of the wall, alongside of the window, in between there and the wall. And of course, it's interconnected up into the wall space and the cockloft above it. So a lot of these things I think people sometimes look at and they're like, yeah, there's some little holes in there. There's some places where it can get through. It's not really going to get through there. It's absolutely going to get through there. Like that's what it does. And when you see this area here, it's going to spread through there. It's going to come up in here and it's going to get right up in there. So the reason I bring that up is we'll look at this next picture here, is when we have fire damage to our windows, whether they're regular windows or bay windows, you can see there's a lot going on here. There's void spaces built into these windows, heavy fire impingement on the inside and the outside. And we have to be sure that we're opening that up appropriately. Like you look at this, how can there not be fire inside of this window, right? And then so we start to peel this off, and guys get a little sometimes, like, oh, okay, let's out. We put water on it. Have you ever seen, I think it would be really cool if they did it, but have you ever seen somebody just leave this in place and like shellac over it and be like, okay, that's our new molding? They always take it down, right? So why not look at all the void spaces in here in these windows that we can have fire, and we have. We see it all the time. Fire gets in there and it just festers in there. So we got to trim all this stuff out. And that's the attention to detail, I think, that sometimes doesn't always get passed on. In good places, it does. Take the time to trim this stuff out. We don't want to come back. It's embarrassing to come back to a rekindle. And, it happens. And there are times when it's going to happen, but that doesn't make it less embarrassing. This is the job that we're here to do. And we do it well by paying attention to this kind of detail, trimming this stuff out, taking the time to look in here and make sure that we don't have anything that's festering.
Is it just Brian? Are you looking at like pull to clean wood? Is that kind of your
Yeah.
target there? Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my, and when you have something like this window, I mean, there is no clean wood, right? Like it's entirely burned up. So we have to just open it all up and do our best to make sure. Then I would say we're going to pull to clean wood where it's interconnected with the rest of the building and make sure that it's not festering up, up in this little roof or anything like that. And then you can't really see it really well in here, but a lot of these bay windows are supported by cantilevered joists. So that creates an opening into the joist space between the floors. So we got to look at that as well below it, above. Obviously, this place is burned out pretty well, so we're going to look everywhere, but we want to make sure we get that opened up. So above that, we have cornices, just a decorative part of the building on the outside that often is interconnected. So it was part of the ventilation system of the building. Sometimes there's like cut out openings in the decorative woodwork. They look like little like flourishes or whatever, but they're actually cutouts. And that allowed air to move freely in these joist spaces. Well, if air moves freely, then we know that fire is going to move freely. And you can see here how it's connected into this mansard and then into the wall and the joist space here. So fire in a cornice is something that is dangerous because number one, the cornice is attached to the building often by nails, old nails, and the material that it's attached into is on fire, so it's going to lose strength. So the cornice could fall, and we could have fire spread there. And you see a lot of times at fires, there'll be a little bit of fire burning out there in the cornice. That's doing damage, and that's potentially dangerous. We need to address that as soon as we can. So we talked about, this is one of my favorite voids. I don't know if I had a favorite void. This is one of them. Is this triangle spot above the steps? This is can be really big depending on the size of the building, but it's often overlooked, and there's a ton of fire that can get in here. The steps, below the steps, each stairway has its own little vertical void space underneath it. So we get a lot of fire travel in the steps. And then you get this up here. It's obviously attached into the cock loft. Um, Hopefully this works. So this is what one looks like here. And I have this poly. Have you heard of Polycam? I don't work for them, but it's a cool little thing that you can get on your phone, and you can make 3D like LiDAR videos of things. So this is um, this is that void space to your left that I made a little like three-dimensional LiDAR map of the void space. I'm not good at this yet, but I'm going to get good at this because this is fun. And,
That looks fun.
yeah. And it can show, you can show like really, if you got to go slow and make sure you get the pictures done right, or else you get the gaps in it. But you can see like this is a huge void space. And conceptually, it'd be hard for me to explain this otherwise. Um, but it's pretty cool. So that's something that I'm gonna keep working on. Do you have any idea what that square box is?
Is that a medicine cabinet?
It is a medicine cabinet. Yeah. Yep. So that was pretty cool. I just thought it was neat.
Just
But so there's a lot that can be done with that in the future once I figure out how to appropriately work it. But I think that's pretty cool. But obviously you see there's a ton of void space here. We get a lot of fire. This is a great place to ventilate on the roof, because when you cut this vent hole up here and you open that space up, number one, you can vent this area. Number two, you can press down the ceiling of the steps, and now you have a whole house vent. Um, and typically on a row house, it's along the party wall because that's where the steps are. And it's about, I would say on the third floor roof, the very top flat roof, it's probably going to be about 15 feet back. And then it's going to take, it'll be about, if you go 4 to 6 feet wide, you're going to cover the top hallway and the top of the steps, put a nice huge vent hole right there, and you vented everything you need to. Um, that was always a go-to move for us on the truck. But
That's interesting because I think even in newer construction townhomes are going up all over. It's just the modern row pretty much, and
yes,
be the exact same vent concept there. That's kind of cool.
yeah, yeah, and it's sometimes if you forget about this, we had a fire. We saw the daytime picture with all the porches burning. Late into the fire, we were down at the end of the row, up on the top floor, and conditions were changing rapidly, and the fire had gotten a hold of this area right here, and it was rolling in there. And if you think about it, it's very similar to a knee wall. It's very similar to a mansard, and it makes the conditions pretty untenable until you figure out where is it coming from and get it opened up. Then it goes out right away. But yeah, that's a good spot. This is a picture or video of that void area burning on the steps. You can see it. There's a ton of. I'm looking up the steps, and you can see it all. It's got a hold of that whole space up there. Just trying to get it opened up a little bit, and then they're going to knock it down. But it's dangerous, right? It's plaster and lath. So at some point, it's going to burn enough in there where that plaster is going to fail. And if you've moved beyond that point, that's a pretty dangerous spot to have a heavy volume of fire, either for your line or for your escape. This is that spot. This is the void area. And this is looking up those same steps. It's burning all up in here. And
Hey, Brian,
that's the
I just
void.
want to stop for a moment because
Yeah.
you hit on a really salient point for fires involving any type of void space, and something that I push really hard, especially for those first crews that are getting in ahead. Like our ladder company regularly pushes in ahead to recon and scout out ahead, and part of that is identifying that where that leading edge of the fire is, so we can find that point of cutting it off. So, and then also to make sure that we're not advancing past it to the point where it breaks out behind us and we've got problems.
Yeah, absolutely. It's critical because, these buildings tend to mask a lot of fire conditions in the void spaces. They're not only plaster and lath, but they could be drywall over plaster and lath. There could be, so it's not always very easy to just come in the house and say, "Oh, here's the fire." Obviously, in this video is a different situation, but you have to understand, like, where did the fire come from? Like, that's one of the questions you should be asking on your size up is like, what happened here before I got here, and where did that fire come from? If I can tell where that fire came from and where that fire is now, I can deduce the path that it traveled to get there. And if I understand the building construction, I can understand the other places that it went or could be, and we got to start looking there. And much like knee walls, you don't want to get beyond that because getting back to your area of refuge or whatever, um, could be a challenge or could burn up your line, and you could be trapped somewhere. And we'll talk about that later on. Um, so, but yeah, absolutely. So these are just, we don't have enough time to talk about all the potential void spaces that are out there and all of the ways that it can affect us. These were some of the big ticket ones that I think that we see fire in a good bit. And then the big ones that, we had talking about were cock lofts and mansards and knee walls. So we could talk about those if you want. We can talk about whatever you want.
Yeah, I think let's
Yeah.
dive into the cock lofts because I think that's something that's readily applicable to the majority of the listeners. It's to some degree.
Yeah, one way or another, they're there. You either, I mean, this is gonna be dumb. You either have a knee wall or a cock loft, right? Like it's either a flat roof or a peak roof, and each comes with its own thing. So, this was a fire that we had that was really burning efficiently and got up into the cock loft and started running the row. We were able to cut it off on the B side. It ran down to the end on the D side. But this is what we don't want. If we can avoid this, that'd be super. But this was one of those fires that was a bit of a campaign. Um, but the fire started in the second floor, burned up the front, got into the cornice, ran the mansard, which we'll talk about later. Also the interior steps. So it got up in there, and then just once it hits the top, it just spreads out just like a porch roof and starts heading down the row. Um, and the problem with them, with the cocklofts, is that they're built perfectly for fire spread. So it's a big open space, it's unimpeded, it's interconnected to everything else, and it's made of combustible materials. And then, we see a lot of blown in insulation, which helps spread the fire as well. But you got this big open space and you're heating it up, and it's eventually going to burn. And once it starts burning, it's going to start spreading out. This particular house from this video was only two. They had a firewall every two houses, but we've had them go as long as 12 houses. Um, and it's a race against time. Can you identify where it's at, and can you get to the place and cut it off, and can you get your trench cut in time to do that? That comes down to training, manpower, and recognizing the conditions on where you should be. Um, but this is a typical cockloft. You can see the old knob and tube wiring is still in there. Unfortunately, in some places that's still in use. We run into it. And then this is just looking up from the living space into that area. You can see, like, it could be 2 or 3 feet tall in the front. Generally, those flat roofs are not flat. They're kind of sloped to the back for rain runoff. But that's a tremendous amount of space above the living space to have a fire burning in. And I talked about the blown-in insulation. That kind of, I think blown-in insulation kind of acts like a forest fire, right? Like, so you have the fire coming up into the space, and then you have embers that are going out, and then you start to get little spot fires, and they either develop right away, or the fire overruns them, or they fester down into there, and they wait until 3 o'clock in the morning when you're back at the firehouse, and then they take off. But we don't want to leave that blown-in insulation up in the cockloft. That's a bad choice. We want to get it cleaned off, make sure it's scraped off all of the structural members wherever you can, the little shelves that are up there because of, building construction. And then we're going to really wet this down and try and clean that off, because inevitably that one space that you left is going to be the one you're going to come back to. This is just another picture of a cockloft above the living space where we had a good fire in the loft, but really not too much going on downstairs. Same room. Good cockloft fires benefit from nice big vent holes. It just, you can pull the ceiling down, you can stick a nozzle up there, you can do whatever you need. You need to get the pressure out of this space and release some of that heat and gas out of there to gain the upper hand. And that's where I think sometimes you can go wrong with a trench. Your trench has to have a primary vent hole first. Otherwise, your trench becomes the primary vent hole, and then you're just drawing the fire down the row.
So when you guys are up there cutting, Brian, you want them plugging some heat holes ahead of time, get a good couple of those, get some relief, and then back up for the trench. And
yeah, we're going to vent over the fire as close to the main body of fire as possible, put a nice big vent hole in there, and then head down and do the trench. That's going to release the pressure. It's going to give it somewhere to go, so it's not going to travel as quickly down the row as it would, and it'll give us the time to get ahead of it. Best case scenario is we could do those things simultaneously, but we typically don't have that kind of manpower. But if you don't do that initial vent hole, whatever you do becomes your primary vent.
Yeah, that's the key thing to remember. This is all a game of pressure, and it's going to go from high to low pressure. So even though you're below it, when you start opening up down below, if you haven't released all that pent up pressure, and your video does a great job of depicting how expansive these spaces can be, you could have a tremendous amount of fire built up above you in that cockloft. And if it's got nowhere to go, all it's going to do is just keep building up heat and pressure. And when you start opening up from down below, it's going to want to come down to your position. So now it's going to obscure visibility. All that crap is just going to start dropping down on top of you. And you can open up the windows from the floor you're operating on underneath, and that'll help expel some of it. But the best way to alleviate that from happening altogether is just giving it a pathway up and out where it wants to go.
Yeah, and I'll show you this video quick. Skip ahead here a little bit, but you can have a smoke explosion as well. And if you watch, it's going to be this window here. It'll zoom in, but you can see, like, right there it is. It's very quick, just a little one. But watch the smoke over here on the side, and then I'll play it again. And you can watch what happens inside. If you look to the right side of the window, you'll see the puff once it gets zoomed in. There it is.
Oh, yeah.
And then if you watch it again, you see the inside. There's an effect in there too. So depending on how pent up that pressure is, or what the condition of the structure is, if you're inside, you could be in a bad way in that type of situation. But it's telling, the signs are there. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, we're pretty clearly ventilated over here. This is the area we're still working on, and we have that If you're looking at like volume, velocity, density, color, we have all of the warning signs going on here that, we're heading in that direction if we don't do something. And sure enough, there it is. So,
Yeah, that's
uh,
and they're not always going to be that readily identifiable, but in this case, you do have that kind of yellowy, mustardy brown colored smoke that's pushing from the seams, and you can tell you've got a well advanced fire in a concealed void space where lack of oxygen is definitely going to be a factor, and getting that early vertical ventilation hole in coordination with the lines inside is going to be huge to because if there is going to be that cockloft explosion taking place, having that place for it to escape up and out is what you want, because yes, it may still drop down, but it won't be as significant if it's got relief up above.
yeah. And it's important that you think about that as, a potentially explosive space, and you think about where does it have to go. It doesn't really have anywhere to go. So what becomes the weakest part of the system is the plaster and lath that you're under. And if it's gonna go anywhere, it's probably gonna come down inside of that building and directly impact where you're at. So super super important to get that vent open. A lot of times on our row houses, we like to get up to the top, check things out, and then if the line's moving in, there's typically, so when we look, here's the doors. So typically, directly in line with the doors on the C side of the top floor, there's going to be a window at the top of the steps. And that's a great window to pop out. As the engine company comes in, they start moving in, they're getting water on the fire. You can pop that window out in the back, and that relieves the pressure inside of the house. And then maybe we don't have to cut the roof. But if it's a top floor fire, then we get right into cutting the roof, depending on where the fire is located. We're not automatically going to cut that roof just because there's a fire in the house. Um, we'll take the windows and use the windows to our advantage. And if we need to, if we have fire up in that cockloft, then we'll look at cutting it.
So it's
So
pretty much the same concept of taking a skylight in a walk up. So with like we got the 3 and 4 story ordinary walk ups with the railroad flats on either side, where the bigger ones you usually have the skylight over the top of the stairs.
yep. Yep, it's just in a different spot. For whatever reason, we do not have a lot of skylights in our city. We have a couple neighborhoods that have some, but this style of construction, this era, there's not a lot of skylights, which I always, when I was on the truck, was always disappointed about, because that just seems like a lot of fun to bust out skylights all the time. But this is we talked about that back side of the house. This is just an example of, so this is the rear L, it's called, or the bump out, second floor, whatever you want to call it. It's called different things. Typically our row houses are 3 stories in the front and 2 in the back, or 2.5 in the front, 1.5 in the back, whatever. But this rear section, we've called it a bump out for many years. It's technically called the L. But this is an example. This is the space, and then we'll just look inside of this flat roof space. This is that window that I was talking about at the top of the steps. The steps are right there. So we got a flat roof on the top, and then from a void space, you see there's the steps. We got insult brick over the wood siding, vinyl over top of it, and then underneath that is that back cockloft, and it's interconnected with that back wall right up into the main cockloft and the rest of the row. So a second floor rear room fire giving some extension has a really good path to get up to that top roof. And we see a lot of people throughout history, if you don't pay attention to that, all of a sudden your cockloft is rolling and you don't know how it got there. This wall is probably the culprit. There's a void space underneath it right there, and then it runs right up the back. Because even in the masonry, even in the ordinary constructed rows, this row spans opposite of the bearing wall, so it's always a wood wall. So you could have a 3-story ordinary, but this back wall, if it's this type of construction, this is going to be a wood frame wall. So you get that fire spread right up the back, and then it's off to the races once it gets up in the row.
During your size up, Brian, when you're looking at these buildings and trying to rule out void spaces and stuff, are you looking
Yeah.
for like pressure differentials within different spaces? Are you looking for like what's kind of some
Yeah,
of the
I
things that
think
stuck out?
that's one of the hardest things that when we go like back to this picture, when you get there and you see this, it's easy to say, well, the whole damn thing is on fire. But you
Right.
got to start looking, there's you may just have, I'm using this as an example, it's not the case here. You may just have fire right here, but this is really pressurized, so it's coming out under good pressure throughout the whole top of that row. So you got to start looking at the other factors. So I like to get 360s done as soon as possible. Not always the easiest thing to do, but I think it's absolutely critical. We do not get a company into the rear typically because a lot of these neighborhoods don't have drivable rows. So it becomes easier for me to get that 360 done than it does to have a company get on scene, come down, take that rear position. Not that we don't cover the rear, but it's just faster for me to get there. So I'll go through the houses, go through the alleyways, whatever, and try and get a look. And I think that'll help tell that story. But I think the volume, velocity, density, color is something that I'm constantly going through, evaluating, looking at the pressure. Is it lazy? Is it really pressurized? Is it if it's really pressurized and it's dark and it's moving fast, then okay, I think the fire's well on its way. Um, but I think these flat roof cockloft fires can sometimes lead you to believe the fire is a lot further along than it is, just because it's at the top of the building, it pressurizes that whole space, and it starts to come out. And I think that's when you go into those other attributes and start looking and say, okay, well, I have smoke out here. It's kind of gray. It's lighter. It's not as pressurized, but I got this over here is cranking like a train, and so I'm going to start here and kind of we'll send crews here. This is my primary of operation. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining
Yeah.
that the right way.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes you get it right, and sometimes you don't, and it's a little further along than you thought. But I think a lot of times it looks like it's a lot further than it is, uh, typically.
And just to kind of couple that, because obviously there's some like exterior spread stuff. You were talking about that earlier with
Hmm.
I love how you're looking at like how did it get there? Tell the story of how it got there. In as far as your kind of hierarchy goes, exterior spread potential, like how much do you prioritize addressing that versus maybe whatever, letting it go a little bit more? Like what's your kind of thought process there?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the surface is, where it's at on the building, right? Like, so if you look at this fire, this is the same fire. This was arrival conditions on the same fire we were just looking at. So clearly we have fire impingement on this cornice, or not impingement, involvement. The cornice is involved. So I know that that is interconnected to those spaces. So if I lose the integrity of that cornice, which quite honestly probably already happened, then I know it has a path to the cockloft and it has a path to the other voids. So we're gonna have to start to prioritize that. Now, that's probably not going to happen from the outside initially. These guys are probably going to stretch in there and knock that down and then get to the window and try and hit that cornice or whatever. But there are times, I think I have a video clip later in the knee wall section that will show like you can hit it from the outside too, right? Like, so I think that, not to go down a rabbit hole or editorialize too much, but I think that a lot of the inside outside stuff got bastardized by people and their own agendas. I think we know that, but it's okay to operate a fire on the outside of this building while there's guys on the inside of the building if you're operating it on the outside of the building. And that's what we could do that here. Um, and we want to slow that down. If it's Intel brick, again, like I gotta make a determination on how did I watch the Insul brick fire develop, or was it already going by the time we got there? And that
Mm,
makes a difference. Like I said, that fire that we looked at, that Insul brick was raging and it looked, beautiful, but it was easily knocked down and it didn't get through the Insul brick. It just there's the so the it's just like a shingle, roof shingle. There's a felt bottom to it, and then there's the brick material, whatever the granular material is. So, and then it's all tarred together. But that stuff will burn, but that felt material actually holds up, pretty well. So if I watch it develop, I know I have more time because it could burn pretty good for a while and not get into the building. Typically, there's always an anomaly where there's some kind of, break in the building or something that it could get into. But at that point, the whole building's on fire anyway. But I don't like to let outside fire go very long. Around the back of these buildings, we have the light and air shafts. Um, and if you get fire going in that, it has everything it needs. Again, it's got a low intake, it has a high output, it's got fuel, and it is creating that heat energy, and it's gonna vortex in there and just burn and burn and burn. And now you can spread fire to multiple floors, to different buildings, and the guys that are pushing the lines inside are going to really have trouble controlling the fire because they're not controlling the main energy point of the fire anymore. So you got to get out there and get that knocked down. So we don't want to let that go too long either. And then it just becomes a matter of, do I have enough people to accomplish those jobs? And if I don't, obviously that's a good cue for, requesting greater alarms, but it's also a good cue for, you know, changing tactics a little bit and switching to some heavier caliber weapons, whether it's a step gun or the deck gun or an aerial master stream or something, and regain control and then go back in and finish it. I hope that answered your question.
yeah, that was perfect. That was awesome.
uh, this is just more cockloft fires. You can see that the common thread here in these are not the original fire buildings, and you can tell that because there's no fire damage to speak of in the living space, but the cocklofts were, heavily involved. I just put that in there because it's a picture of a vent hole above a cockloft fire, and you can see that it's clean down here, and it it the fire benefited from having that hole placed there. So we're still a big roof ops department. This is a fire that started on the first floor, has burned all the way up through the building. This was a building that was part of a row. The rest of the row was torn down at some point. So this is a wood frame wall covered with insul brick. And you can start to see when you're doing your size up of this, there's fire in different places. But if you look up here, we're over pressurizing that void space. So it has to come out in wherever it can. And if we start to see these little things developing, we know that we have a fire in here and we're getting into that over pressurization. And it's pretty cool because if you look at this, you have it coming out of the mansard, it's coming out of the cockloft, and then right here's the chimney, and you can see it's in the void spaces along the chimney as well. This fire, I'll see if I can play these at the same time. No, I can't. So this is the part of the roof operation from that. They're putting that vent above the steps where we had talked about earlier. It's not the best video, but it's the best video I have of us putting a vent hole in that spot. But but they're making that, and clearly, it's doing its job. If anything, it could be bigger. But all of that pressure, if you're not releasing that pressure, all of that pressure is going somewhere, and it's spreading the fire, maybe getting the conditions right to have a smoke explosion, and it's over pressurizing that space. So we want to make sure we do that. Again, I think it goes without saying, but it does need to be said. It has to be coordinated with the fire attack. We're not going to do any of this until we have meaningful water on the fire. Otherwise, we're adding to the problem. So that's pretty much what I had about cockloffs. Anything further on that?
No, I think that really hits on it really well. I love the way you kind of you broke down talking about reflex time for line placement and the importance of getting that base water application to cut the legs out from underneath it, especially when the fire's starting to auto extend, or we are talking about a fire of exterior origin where especially in those rear circumstances where you talked about, where it's getting that radiation feedback from that kind of that tight those tight quarters in the back, where you're looking at like how quickly is it vertically extending, is it starting to penetrate into other floors or other void spaces? Because not only do we have to cut the legs off and get good base water application, but we also got to look at how quickly are we gonna be able to get lines into that leading edge where the fire is extending to next, of where it's going to go, so we can cut it off. So I think that's critical to put that all into play. And you hit it on where that point of where the fire come from, like figuring out where the fire originated from, so we can get base water application, and then using your kind of street IQ of building construction and layout of figuring out how is this thing going to now spread, and where am I going to have to go to stop it in its tracks. I think that was beautiful.
Yeah, it's super important. And when you look at these, from a size up standpoint, you get here, I ask the same questions. Where was it? Where is it? Where's it going? Where do we interact with that? And then continually ask that question. One of the things that is super critical is that your crews understand the operational tempo and the tempo of the people that they work with, because getting a truck to the roof and in position to vent and getting a line to the fire used to be relatively, sometimes the truck was playing catch up to the engine. But I think we're starting to see the interiors of these homes change a lot, right? Like before, people lived pretty clean, simple lives, and we just keep amassing stuff. So moving through a building to get to the seat of the fire isn't always at the same rate that it used to be because of what's in there. So that's cool. I mean, that happens, and it can happen in any situation for a million reasons. We have to understand that we have to communicate that tempo change to the other people so that they know. That's why benchmark communications are so critical. Listening, not getting hyper focused on your job, and listening to the whole thing. Because if you do, let the genie out of the bottle at the wrong time, we're going to have to chase it, and it's going to be really hard to do. So
what are some of your guys' benchmark communications, Brian, that you guys really like key in on and stuff like that?
Yeah, so we'll do definitely water on the fire is one of them. I try to visualize like entry and track that on my command sheet, and that way I have a good running clock. But they'll call out water on the fire. We have a roof report that I ask the guys to do, which would be conditions on the roof and like an urban 360, a lookout back, what the conditions are out there. And then, when they get the vent holes ready or cut, then they're going to tell me, hey, we got a vent hole open here, here, here. But they're listening for the engine for that water on the fire. Once we get that transmission, then unless I correct it, and we have had some instances where we've had a report of water on a fire, and they weren't wrong, but they also weren't at the main fire. That doesn't happen that often, but we've had a couple times where that water on the fire ended up being premature, not because they weren't doing what they were supposed to, but just because the main body of fire lies somewhere else. And though they're fighting fire, it's not where our main fire is at.
And when in those instances when that's happened, that's just I'm assuming simply addressed by you jumping on and saying, "Hey, hold up, we're not there yet," and communicating back to them that feedback, or how
Yeah,
does that dynamic play?
we'll look at a fire here in a minute that we had where that played a huge role in what the interior crews were seeing and what I was seeing outside and what everybody else knew. And I don't like to. I've been accused of being rude to people on the radio, but I don't like to be rude to people on the radio. But at some point, like I'll try and lead you along, but then we have to have that conversation of like, bro, like, and I said that at this fire, I was like, I don't know what you see inside, but what we see outside is a completely different fire. And then that was enough for him to say, got it. I understand what you're saying. Like I had made a couple of comments and some other people were making comments. I upgraded it to a first alarm fire. Like, there was a lot of things that were happening, but everything that they were seeing was kind of confirmation bias to what they believed. And I think that's, it's important that we understand how that can derail a fire ground. So we'll just talk about it now since we're talking about it. But like we had the fire, it was sent out as a fire at a particular address. It was a row of 16 houses, and we're kind of middle of the row. And they got there, very light smoke showing on the A side, not really coming from anywhere, but there was smoke in the area. They met with the people. They said we have fire in our third floor like baseboard. So they went upstairs. They went up, and now think about like the row house steps are on the party wall. So they come up to the top of the steps and they go to the left away from the party wall, and there's a knee wall there, and there's a little bit of fire there. They start knocking it down with the can, and so they're like, okay, like we have this small fire here. There's a little closet that was built into the knee wall. We got this knocked down. They were bringing a line up. It was pretty smoky, but hey, don't take the windows. We got this knocked down. It's about the time I'm arriving, and I'm looking. I was like, that is a lot of smoke, and this is a really long row. So I'm erring on the side of caution already. Like I don't want to miss anything here. And then as I get up there, the transmissions were kind of de-escalating coming from the interior crew, but the conditions on the outside were still escalating. And so they're like, "Don't take the windows." And I was like, "Yo, truck two, get on the roof." Like, and so like that should have been like one clue. It's like, "Hey, get on the roof." Then I was like, so we call it a first alarm. We have a tactical box, and then when we have a working fire assignment, we say fill out the first alarm. So I was like, "County, fill out the first alarm." And then I did the 360. I reported heavy smoke showing from the rear, and then I came back around the front, and um, he still was kind of like, I don't want to say talking people out of like escalating the incident, but they thought they had it under control. What they didn't realize is that when they opened that knee wall closet, it ventilated that whole section of the row's void spaces, and that fire took off. And so it was several minutes until we got into the exposure where the actual fire was occurring to get to the main body of fire. And you'll see the pictures. It was pretty extensive fire. But that's what I had to say. I was like, "Hey, I don't know what you see in there, but it isn't what we see out here." And then he was smart enough. He was like, "Got it." And then they started to open up more, and then they had heavy fire. They found the fire. And so, you have to know each other good enough though to have those conversations and understand what that means. Like without, I think sometimes that can devolve into inappropriate radio communications. But you know what I mean? If you know your team and you know all the marks you should be hitting, then you can say, hey, oh, I get it. Like he's trying to tell me something. And so
For sure. And
Um,
I got the chance to drive one of our senior shift commander about a year or two at a fire on overtime. We have a chief's aide position, and got to pick his brain after the fire, and was asking him like how he kind of processes fire scenes, and he defined everything so simply for me. And he said, when I'm outside of a fire and I'm judging how we're doing, I'm listening for the benchmarks and the radio communications from the crews on the inside. I'm weighing that against what I'm seeing on the outside, and then taking those two things and evaluating, do they match? And then it's how much time has elapsed and are we winning or losing? And I
yeah,
thought that was just such a brilliant, concise way of saying
yeah,
it. And that's really
and
captures.
if absolutely, and if all your players are hitting their marks, it's easy, right? We create most of our own friction in our operations, and if we can do the work ahead of time to keep that friction out of our operations, they generally go pretty well. Outside of what we don't know, we don't know. But
Exactly.
but that's yeah, that's absolutely and having I tell my guys, I want to hear that feedback. If I'm not hearing the feedback in a timely manner, I'll ask you for a can report. That's my prompt to you that, hey, I need more info. If I don't get the info, then I use my imagination, and my imagination always errs on the side of caution. So if you want to keep fighting this fire, you need to tell me that, this is what you're encountering, this is what you're doing. Otherwise, I am going to default to your safety. And, who for whatever that means for whatever fire, it's always different. But yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think it can be really simple.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
And
think those good radio comms are that comfort food for the incident commander on the outside.
yeah, I had Lieutenant Yonkin was in search in a building one time, and it was a two-story apartment building, ordinary construction, and I hadn't heard from him, and I asked him for a can report, and he keyed up his mic, and he just left his mic open for a second, and all I could hear in the background was the irons banging away. And he said, "We're still searching." And then I was like, "Got it." I knew they were on the second floor. Now I know that they're running into locked doors, and I have to adjust my tempo for what I think they're going to be able to accomplish because they now have to force doors and search. So it's going to slow them down a little bit. But if you do the work to get to know people and build that level of communication, I knew exactly what he was telling me. Um, but you have to spend the time. You can't just show up and think, oh, it's all gonna just work out because it doesn't. So anyway, you want to talk about knee walls?
Let's do knee
Uh,
walls.
Let's
yeah,
do
let's
it.
do it.
So knee walls are love-hate situation because I think they're a challenging fire, but they can be pretty dangerous. One of the things that I notice about knee wall fires, and I don't have the scientific data or even really this is more in your lane, uh, to understand it, but knee wall fires are always smokier. They're just always producing a lot of smoke, and it has to do with the ventilation profile that's taken place there. But you can always tell a good knee wall fire by the extreme volume of smoke that's being put off. So typical knee wall is that squared off living area in a peaked roof space. So we just opened one up to show our guys what's going on in there. You have the little attic space, then you have the sloped wall or ceiling, and then you have where the actual knee wall is, and it's just a void space that sometimes is used as closet, sometimes it's just left like this, and they can be in various configurations around the top floor, depending on how your peaks are set up. And then it always is interconnected into that little tiny attic up there at the top of the triangle. Um, these are just a couple views of different knee walls that we have. Uh, this is just one that shows you where it's connected to the back bump out section and then up. And then you had a good fire going up above. It came up that back wall and got up above it. This is the main peak of the roof where it meets that L or bump out at the back of the house on the seaside. And you can see that, well, you can't see it in this picture, but typically they build this peaked roof first and then they build that addition out the back. So you see him opening up this area here. Just pulling it back. So this is just showing a couple of the different layers. There's this one isn't that thick, but there's the tin roof, the asphalt, and then the original wood shake shingles underneath it. And you see it's open into that void area on the top floor of the house right there. And then obviously it's interconnected into this cock loft over the back section of the house. And then this is looking at the rear side, kind of a similar view, but we'll follow it into the house. Again, you see that void space under the flat roof that sticks out the back. It's interconnected into that knee wall area. And then that is the void space. Wide open, no fire stopping. So we're going to have fire spread from down below up into that area. Here you can see they're made into closets on the front side of the building. And then again, it's just connected up all the way to that little attic space at the top. This one has a nice fan, power fan in there, so it's going to power vent that, draw that fire all through there. That'd be pretty cool. And there's the closet spaces built in. So, I forget why I put this video in here. This is just looking at the other side and where we had some fire come up into that, came out from below, was burning down below, got up into that void space, and then got up into the knee wall area and filled that whole knee wall up. Was burning pretty good in there.
Brian, we had a recent incident where guys were dry stretching up, firing a knee wall void, and opened up a little bit early before water was there, and the guys on the inside were talking about the pressure buildup in those knee walls, how it just within about 15 seconds kind of drove things from crystal clear to we need to probably be getting out of here type of a deal, and end up kind of working out, and they got water and things worked out fine. But have you ever had something like that, kind of rules of thumb you use when you anticipate it might be in the knee wall, anything like that worth passing on to guys?
Yeah, absolutely. We had an incident where we had a guy get stuck and bailed out a window in a knee wall fire. And that's not really my story to tell, but I can give you the general gist of what happened. They had a fire in a duplex, and it had pretty good control of the knee wall space. And they got up in there into the third floor, into that half story to do a search, and conditions changed rapidly. And I think in some of these older houses, the issue that is a challenge is that it's burning really well and there's heat and pressure in there. So it's really degrading the lath on those plaster walls. But gravity is kind of holding it all in place. And then eventually that will fail, whether you touch it and it fails or it fails on its own. And then it's going to rocket out into that space. We see that pressurized smoke coming out of the knee wall dormers and stuff all of the time. Like when you have a house with a knee wall and there's fire involving the knee wall, somewhere on that top there is it looks like the old steam locomotive worth of smoke coming out of that thing. If that if that isn't coming out of there, or even if it is coming out of there like that, and you put a hole into the living space, well, guess where else it's going to come right into that living space. One of the things that I think, just having looked at knee wall fires and fires where guys have gotten in trouble at knee wall fires, are that the steps in this house, it's not these particular like Federalist style row houses, the steps typically do come up on the party wall. But in a lot of knee wall houses, the steps come out in the middle of the room. So you're now starting to combine multiple issues, and that's kind of that Swiss cheese lining up type of situation, right? So now not only do you have all the problems with the knee wall, now you're putting yourself out, dumping out into the room in the middle of the room, and you can easily get disoriented. And when things go to shit, that's going to multiply that disorientation until you get a hold of what's going on. So a lot of the tactics call for starting to fight the fire from the top of the steps, right? Like we're gonna pop these walls right here at the top of the steps and take a look and see what happens, and we're gonna fight the fire into the room instead of going to where we think the fire is, because it could come. It's the knee wall wraps around us in a lot of ways. So I think you have to slow down and really pay a lot of attention to your orientation when you're moving into that space. And let's be honest, a lot of these knee wall places are attics or so the organization of the room is going to be off. So once you get into that space, it's
Yes.
it's not a typical bedroom. It's not, you can't start to kind of orient yourself to what you think a typical layout or the things you might find, because there could be anything up there, and that's not
So
going to help you.
yeah, and
Go
you're talking about, if I understand you correctly, like before you start opening up, anchoring yourself to that stairwell first, and then working from there out, as opposed to getting to the middle of the room and pop
right.
pop pop, and then having to scramble and find the stairwell or something like that. So
Yeah.
kind of anchor
Yeah.
first, open second, sort of a deal.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And our guy that ran into some trouble up there, they had a failure of a knee wall, and it changed the conditions in there, and there was some disorientation. He found the window, was able to signal to the guys outside. They threw two ladders to the window, and he dove out the window and did a self arrest on the window, and was able to get out. The other guy had to go back down the steps, but tried to come back up and find him. And it happened really quick. And it's just that failure of the knee wall introduced that overpressurization in those hostile conditions into the living. It's probably already smoky in there or whatever, but it changes like that. So you do have to be a little bit more aggressive with your orientation and your path to safety, I think, than you would in other places. Not that can't happen in other void spaces, but it happens time and time again in knee wall spaces. So um, I think that's critical. And this is a good example of, opening that knee wall space up. That's in there surrounding you in that room until you get that rooftop opening. So, the conditions inside that room are hostile, and they're coming for air, they're coming for more fuel. So it's heading from the void into the living space. This allows, venting this allows the pressure to get out of the building. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um, this is just an example of the knee walls burning across the back of some buildings here. You can see where it already burned that knee wall space here, went across the bottom of the dormer, and is working on this side here. This is a pretty well advanced fire that this was at. And they're not just like these old row houses or whatever. This is the top floor of a big Queen Anne style house. And this is it's a 2.5 story, so we're up on that half story. But I mean, this half story is bigger than my whole house.
Well,
It's
that's pretty.
huge. Yeah, the whole house is like this. They have, like, there is no walls in this entire house. It's fantastic to go in and look around. Um, but you can see the massive amount of space that can be up there, and you know trying to push a line up when you have those spaces burning is going to be hard. It's going to be pretty untenable, and it's going to be a good firefight. So if we could pop that open from the outside, make a huge difference in being able to get those guys in there. Yeah, I could spend a week in this house. It was incredible. Beautiful stained glass, like it's really nice.
Yeah, that is a beautiful place.
But you can see some of the knee walls are turned into storage. Some of them are just void spaces, and we don't know. And even if they are turned into storage, they might be stuffed full. We still can't get in them, or whatever. So,
Right.
but that was a good find. We just happened to be there for an unrelated call, and then the people let us go through the house. So this is the arrival, my arrival at the fire that I was talking about, that we were not on the same page. So they were reporting light smoke inside, nothing much. And already, like, I'm like, I can't see the buildings. I'm already suspect that there's something else going on here. And then as I walked up, you can start to see that there's pretty good. It's not super pressurized, but it's brown, it's thick, and there is a little bit of pressure to it around back. We got good smoke coming out. So let me see if I can pause that. This is where the fire started, in the ceiling of this section of the building. We were in the peaked roof section of this building over here. So these people were not home, and there was no conditions presenting on the A side that there was any fire over here whatsoever. So when they went in here, everything that the caller told them, they found as correct when they went inside. So everything was lining up with the information that they were given. And then it was a little bit later that we realized that this whole cockloft was burning, and that was where it was coming from. The smoke was a little heavier. It kind of bleaches out with the light. They are up here, right in that area is where they're at. So back out front now, things are not improving. And eventually is when we got on the same page. And I can tell you at this point, the fire is extending rapidly through all of those void spaces, and it was missing air, and we gave it air when we opened that up and started doing our overhaul, not knowing that we were becoming the top of the chimney for that section of void spaces, and it allowed that fire to really start taking off. So eventually it went to a second alarm. We got some good vent holes up on the roof, and I think they're in this video here. You can see when we vented, it took the rest of the pressure off all of these other void spaces now, right? Like, we don't have smoke pushing out of all of the other places that we did because we got those topside vents, and it allowed us to get in there. This is after the fire. The fire started on this roof here and got into this knee wall space, and you'll see it went up this way, it came across this way, and our guys were inside of this window on this house over here all the way to the right. I hope that makes sense. That's the area that the fire started, and then it extended into that knee wall area, into the main house, and it ran up that wall. That's the area where the fire started. That's the knee wall space, and then it ran right up to the top. Here's some of the vent holes we got in. But that's that attic space above that half story in 3 different houses was like that. This is where they originally came to. So now if you think about it, the fire is behind this fireman in the other house in that rear bump out area. So they came up here came away from where that fire was and had a little bit of fire right here on the floor. And then once they put the can on that, they knocked it down, but then they opened this door, and that's when it vented the top of that void space, if that makes sense. And then it really took off. That's just
So
another
they had a
one.
little bit of a glow down by the trim down low. That's kind of what they
Yep,
keyed in on.
that
Yeah.
was it, and that was exactly what the lady described to them. She said, "We have this little fire at the wall in the back," and they got there, and sure enough, that's what it was. It was just it was smoky enough that when they knocked the original fire down, they thought they had it. And when they started opening up to make sure that they had it was when it really started taking off. And that's the same time that I arrived on the scene. So I saw a very different fire from what they went into. They had a light smoke condition outside. What you saw from my arrival video was not at all what they saw when they got there. So already it had started changing. And then we had to, we slowly worked our way together until we were back on the same page. But it was going pretty good.
Yeah, I think
So
that's for me, to kind of start wrapping this up was like there's kind of three big takeaways that I got from your presentation is, one with these void space fires, having a high degree of suspicion, two, the importance of communication and making sure that the crews on the outside, the crews top side, and the crews inside are all communicating to have that trifecta of, all the areas covered, and then maintaining that positional discipline to, make sure we open up in the right place at the right time, make sure we've got, those lines in place, and then also the follow up on the back end too of making sure we do proper overhaul so we're not coming back. Those are like the three things that are sticking out in my mind of walking
yeah,
away from this.
absolutely. And they're critical. All of those things are critical, but they don't matter if we haven't developed the team. So, if you don't understand the rules of the game, if you don't understand the players, then it really doesn't matter because you can get to a fire and it'll be, I call it like first time every time, right? Like we've been to 1,000 first fires, but we've not learned anything from that. We have to start with learning who each other is, what our capabilities are, what our deficiencies are, be open and honest about that. And then so you can understand the team, the tempo that the team develops, all that kind of stuff, and then start to do the work on understanding the environment that we're operating in. My environment is different than your guys' environment. We need to understand that and what the building construction is, how fire behaves in that building construction, what can we do, and then all of the things that you talked about start to come into play. But if we have a dysfunctional team, and you bring those things into play, it doesn't matter. We're still not gonna be able to be efficient and effective. And that's always my goal with these is we want to be as safe as possible, but we want to be smooth and efficient and effective. And we need to live up to our obligation that we swore that we're going to come in here and make your problem better. And, sometimes that means we're going to step into harm's way. We're going to step into the fray and it's going to be dangerous. Um, and I expect that people will do that, but I also expect that we will have done the work to mitigate as much of that as possible ahead of time. And, having discussions about this after the fact, after action reports, looking at our fires, looking at other people's fires, and understanding what happened. Um, you know, it's the crux of everything else that we do. So,
I love the kind of concept of being proactive as a chief on the outside, like telling the story of where the fire came from, which is huge because for like I'm a company officer, I don't try to get a backside look, but I don't always have all that information. So knowing that there's a chief that's able to kind of piece that story together as as it's developing, and then coupling the the inside and the outside looks together with these void space fires is another big takeaway of how important it is, because what you think you have inside versus what they're seeing outside, or vice versa, is the juxtaposition of these spaces. Sometimes one vantage point doesn't always have the whole story, and coupling those two, and the importance of having that experience outside, and kind of those eyes from that chief position that knows how to differentiate between those viewpoints. Especially as uh, there's a maybe a chief sitting, maybe they're not eyes on the building. Maybe a chief doesn't have that preference to have eyes on the building. Well, somebody's got to have those eyes on the outside. And yeah, just the highlighting the importance of that was really evident with a lot of this discussion today. I really love that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate that you saw that, because I think it is important. We, regionally, there's a lot of discussion about, where you should run your command from. And what, I don't care. Like, you could run your command from wherever you want. That's your decision. But I think it's important that somebody has to be looking at the fire. And, could I run a fire remote from yeah, I could. I mean, obviously they run massive wildfires from remote locations. There's a lot of different types of incidents that can be run from different locations. But having somebody looking at that fire and watching is absolutely critical, because it's all predictable outcomes. And so you have to be able to see it, though. The fire is going to send all of the signals that it can send. If you're not there to see it, then you're going to miss them. And the worst thing that you could possibly do is send somebody inside, and not, we're already in an information deficit. I don't want it to be because we didn't do our part of that intel gathering, right? There is always going to be something that we don't know that we don't know. These people have, lithium ion bikes on the second floor. There's always it's hoarding conditions, or, there's a million different things that we don't know. We're already dealing with that, but we're aware of that. It is our responsibility to read these buildings, to read the smoke, to understand the construction and the fire spread, so that we can communicate that. And I expect to hear it from my guys. I tell them, if you see something if you think is important, then call it out. Let me know. Let everybody know. We are on the same team, and we are fighting the same battle. And the more efficient we can be, the more honest we can be, the more humble, in that we are only as good as our last fire, and we have to, go out there and do it all again the next time. And, that's super important to me. When we let our confidence and our ego get in our way, we miss things. And when we miss things, we make bad decisions, and we put people where they shouldn't be. And I'm a fan of being where we shouldn't be. I don't want to say that the wrong way, but like, we're going to be in the fray. We're going to go in there. We're going to do our job. It's dangerous, but I want to make sure that we are doing it in the safest way that we can. And we can't be a part of the problem that we're coming to fix. And so doing those things, watching from the outside, having somebody there to see that, like, okay, if you have somebody who's going to run command from a remote location, that's cool. But then somebody has to be assigned to do that. I unfortunately am not lucky enough to have a battalion aide. So in the initial response, it's me. I am the incident commander, the safety officer, the accountability officer, staging, all of those things, until I get more help there. Would I love to be able to be more efficient in the initial stage of an incident? Absolutely. But it's not the case. So developing the team so that we're all looking at the same things and speaking the same language is critical. And I think that, having these kind of discussions is what does that.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better, Brian. That was beautiful, and this really captures the heart and soul of what Jay and I are looking to accomplish with this podcast. And it's putting in that front end work and having these conversations to learn about the fire dynamics, the building construction, you know, how it all interfaces with our tactics and victim survivability. That's the whole goal, is, you know, putting in that work to build that slide tray and, you know, pick the brains of those who are doing it on a regular basis, that have this this really institutional knowledge about these subjects. So I am so thrilled that you were able to come on, and really grateful for your time and for sharing your expertise with everyone. I mean, Jay and I were just texting back and forth. We could sit here and keep this going for hours and be on the edge of our seats listening in. But in the interest of time, I think this is the perfect place to cut it for the first episode. But I think we absolutely accomplished our goal, which is to leave our listeners with, you know, actionable insights that they can readily apply to their next fire. So, Brian,
Awesome.
I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for your
Yeah.
time.
No, I really appreciate you even thinking of me. Hopefully, you'll have great success with the podcast. I'm excited because that's the kind of information that I think that I want to hear from a show. So that's really cool. So thank you for thinking of me and for having me on. Look forward to hearing it.
Yeah, our pleasure. Jay, any closing thoughts?
No, we're gonna have to have Brian back on here. We're gonna just keep dipping back into the well, the video footage and everything else, and you know, coupling the game film with you know, just his understanding of the fire ground is. We're gonna have to just keep dipping into that well periodically here. So try to keep pulling that out. So
Well, hopefully I'll keep going to fires and have more. So
Yeah, right on. And you're absolutely right. We'll definitely be reaching back out to Brian in the future to follow up, because we absolutely just scratched the surface on this. To all our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and listen up for the next episode. Take care, everyone.